Hey everybody, this week I want to talk about the recent Christmas RS to PK box tournament that Jason Klasinski held. I ended up finishing in the top 4 of the tournament, losing a very close mirror match to James Arnold. So today I want to cover my list, and then I will also share the other 3 lists that made top 4 as well. Heading into the tournament, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to play. I felt like some sort of fast stage 1 deck was going to be the right call. I knew that those would perform well against the majority of the field, and even in rough matchups or bad matchups, I knew that if I got a good enough start that I could overcome those. I had tested a couple of different decks and that I've covered on the channel as well, including Arcanine EX, I played Scizor EX, Banette EX, and ultimately I decided on Banette. I thought Banette just matched up well. It had the highest and quickest damage output, and it was the easiest to set up thanks to Shuppet's Ascension. I knew that Dark was going to see play in the tournament, so most Dark Pokemon are weak to fighting. This is kind of how I arrived at the Lunatone Solrock combo. This isn't a new combo. Jeremy Scarf Kim won Worlds with it in the senior division in 2007. And James Arnold had won a couple of the Sunday RS to PK tournaments with it over the last few months. What ultimately sold me on the deck was when James pointed out to me that Lunatone gave Solrock free retreat. So instead of having just a Shuppet be the good opening for the deck, Shuppet or Solrock could instantly lead to a turn 1 Banette. The Solrock combo, you do need a Transceiver or a Mentor, which we bumped up some of those lines, which I'll cover in the video. But just the sheer volume of good starts and what I felt to be favorable matchups for the format led me to end up playing this deck. So I'll walk through it here real quick. For Shuppets, the strong point of a Shuppet is that you get the Ascension attack. This lets you instantly get a turn 1 Banette and very quickly start putting turn 2 pressure on the opponent. Banette is I guess I describe Banette as kind of a glass cannon. It's got low HP with only 90 hit points, but it also hits for insane damage very quickly. Shadow Chant does 30 damage plus 10 more damage for each support in your discard pile. You can add up to 60 damage that way. So for 2 energy, you can hit for 90 damage. And then a Shady Move lets you move a damage counter from any Pokemon in play to another Pokemon in play. This can be from your Pokemon to your opponent's Pokemon. This helps you create really good math, and if you're able to use more than 1 Shady Move over the course of a turn, you can move 10 or 20 damage and really either secure a knockout for that turn or make sure you're setting up knockouts for the following turn. One of the other things I really liked about the deck is that we got to play a Pokemon with Safeguard, and I felt this could help because against a lot of the other turn 2 decks in the format, I've always kind of believed that turn 2 style decks are easily tier 1 decks in the format, and then having a built-in counter to other turn 1 or turn 2 decks was going to be very beneficial to me. To accommodate the Lunatone Solrock combo, I did drop down a Banette EX here to 3. This shouldn't make any sort of difference because we can include Lunatone into our prize trade with the opponent, so being down a Banette EX wasn't a major thing. I have played around with 2 Safeguard Banettes, but ultimately it was cut for room as well. I also don't, unless you have a strong read on the format being very heavily EX decks that don't play counters, then I don't think the second Banette is worth it. I think just 1 Banette is fine. So 2 Lunatone, and then we split the Solrock line. You split, you do want 2 copies of the Lunashade Solrock just so you can shut off. Make sure you're shutting off Pidgeot, Porygon, anything with a colorless power, any colorless Pokemon with a power excluding EXs. And then 2 copies of this Solrock. None of the attacks are very good. Reflective Beam can be okay in a pinch. Scorching Light is probably the best option out of both Solrocks. But the ability to give your Lunatones 80 HP is also beneficial. So jumping back here to Lunatone, the body gives Solrocks free retreat. Foresight is probably the most broken attack in the entire format. I don't think it's recognized as that, but I think it is probably the most broken attack in the entire format. just because you can have games where you're not doing very well in, but if you're able to admin them to a low hand size and you foresight them, you are essentially guaranteeing that they're never going to draw anything. Or if you open with Soul Rock and your hand is pretty good, you can foresight your opponent and basically just guarantee that they won't. So if you open the game with Soul or Lunatone, you can foresight the opponent, and unless they have, you're basically telling them that they have to have something in their hand that lets them shuffle the deck, like a transceiver, a mentor, etc. Yes, this is pretty likely they will have that, but in an off chance where they don't have that in the opening hand, you basically guarantee they will not draw one. And you can just straight win the game from there. So the attack target beam does 20 damage plus 10 more damage for each Soul Rock you have in play. It's not a very strong attack, but it is good enough to get you past Pokemon that are fighting weak. Popular fighting Pokemon or fighting weak Pokemon in the format are going to be Dark Tyranitar, Jolteon EX, Dark Steel or Sneasel EX or Rocket Sneasel EX, along with just a lot of other odds and ends Pokemon in the format that are fighting or that are going to be weak to fighting. Since I do play all these additional basics that I normally don't play in turn 2 decks, outside of the 4 Shuppet, you also run 2 Lunatone, 4 Soul Rock, so this gives you 10 good basics. I felt more comfortable playing the 1 Holon's Magnemite and then the 1 Jolteon Star. I consider this a near staple for Banette, even though it is a bad opening, but being able to play a Holon Mentor and then grab a searchable energy off that, I felt was a safe enough. It was worth the risk of playing another bad opener. 4 Holon Transceiver, 3 Mentor. This is kind of a nod to 1 playing the Magnemite, and then 2 that we are playing the Soul Rock line that we want as considering the Soul Rock a good opener, so we can Mentor, grab the Lunatone, Shuppet, and then if we need to, an Energy and get that turn 1 Ascension. 1 Holon Adventurer, 1 Holon Scientist. I also want to note that all the Holon supporters discard a card, which that's another way that you can dump supporters into your discard pile to power up Banette. Typically, you have to find a way to put them in there. Playing 1 per turn is just going to be too slow to build up that damage at the pace that you need to build it up. 4 Rockets Admin. I've talked about this with turn 2 decks before. It may seem counterproductive to play 4 Admin in a deck that you know is designed to go up on prizes very quickly, but a lot of the time what happens is your opponent will put everything into answering that first Banette and put all their resources into it, and then once they get that first KO, they go down to 4 prizes. You usually have a second Banette ready, and then you're able to admin them to a 4-card hand with a very weak board state, as long as you can knock out whatever knocked out your first Banette. It helps really well in those prize trade-offs, especially when you're shutting off their search of either Pidgeot or Porygon. 3 TV Reporter. I think TV Reporter is infinitely better than Holon Adventurer. There is a lot of argument here to split it just so you don't prize the 1 copy of Adventurer. I decided to risk it, just play that extra TV Reporter. I think it's so much stronger to be able to see 3 additional cards and then choose your discard target, instead of being forced to choose a discard target before you see the cards. 2 Castaway. Castaway is just to help us make sure that we're seeing that turn 1 energy when we need it. It also searches out some of the tools, which I'll talk about in just a minute here. 1 Professor Elm's Training Method. I do not like to play a heavy Elm's Training Method in the deck, just because the idea is that you are going to be using Ascension to find that first Banette, and then ideally just drawing into the 2nd or 3rd Banette over the course of the game. The 1 Elm's Training is searchable off both Castaway and Scott, so I think it's worth including, but I don't want to go any higher than just the 1 copy on it. 1 copy of Scott. This is to find our stadiums. Along with that, it also finds those one-ofs, such as Professor Elm's Training Method or Castaway, make sure we have our admin when we need it, etc. Scott plays okay in the deck. I think it's worth the 1 copy, but it never feels exceptionally good unless you're in a matchup where you really do need to see your stadiums. 3 copies of Warp Point. Heading into the tournament, I knew that POW lock style decks were going to be very popular. I wanted to make sure that I was able to deal with those and get out of those situations. I knew heading in that with my style of deck against a POW block style of deck that I was going to be up on prizes very quickly. I was hoping in these sort of situations that I would be able to take 2 or 3 prizes relatively easily and then be able to use trade each one of my warp points and then my warp energy for a prize. So essentially, as long as I could take 2 prizes fairly, I could warp point and warp energy to get my last 4 prizes from the opponent. Warp point also combos really well with Banette. Either in case if you can do multiple shady moves in a turn and steal a knockout on the bench that way, or if they send something up that you, just to give you a prize while they try to build up something stronger on their bench, you're able to warp around that and not let them choose which prize they're going to give you. 2 copies of Buffer Piece. Banette is very weak with only 90 hit points, and this gives you a little bit more survivability. It is weak to Windstorm, and Windstorm is very commonly played in the format. You just are trying to put so much pressure on your opponent that they have to find multiple outs to answer your Banette, and Buffer Piece just adds one more piece to that combo that they need to answer a Banette. 1 Strength Charm. You have a lot of ways to kind of alter your damage with Shadow Chant by discarding supporters, your shady move. Strength Charm just helps you find that 10 extra damage. It also helps you hit 110 damage, which is a very good number in the format with cards like Rayquaza EX. For Crystal Beach, you can make some arguments on what stadium to play. I should have played 1 Phoebe stadium. It should have been 3 Beach, 1 Phoebes. I knew in games that I was going to go up on prizes very quickly, that I was going to be very commonly facing against cards like Scramble Energy, Double Rainbow Energy, stuff like that. I felt Crystal Beach was going to be a very strong out to that. And once again, we are just trying to create trying to put our opponent in a spot where they need one more card to answer our Banette. Where I'm not saying they won't find a Scramble Energy or they won't find a Windstorm, but that maybe to knock out a Banette, they need a Rare Candy, a Pokemon, a Windstorm, a Scramble Energy. You're just trying to add one more card to that combination they need. And if they miss a single copy or a single part of that combination, then they won't be able to knock out the Banette. Energy, I did go a little bit lower here. I play 14 Energy along with the 1 Magnemite. I do like to play 16. I think 16 is a good number to make sure you're hitting your turn 1 energy drop. Being able to have a Mentor searchable energy made me feel a little comfortable, a little bit more comfortable going with a lower number here. So 7 Psychic Energy, 4 Rainbow Energy. This gives me 11 total energy to cover the Psychic needed for Shadow Chant. And then 2 Fighting, along with 4 Rainbow. That gave me 6 outs to be able to use Lunatone's Target Beam. This played fine for the tournament. No issues with this at all. 1 Warp Energy. I felt that since Lunatone gave Solrock free retreat, that Warp Energy would be very easy in case somebody tried to POW energy off of Banette EX. Warp Energy would let me not only get a drop under the Banette, but also let me switch back to a Solrock that would have free retreat, where I could bring up a different attacker. This actually came up over the course of the tournament in my game with Jason. So I'm really glad I played the Warp Energy. I do wish I would have played at least 2 Warp Energy, and if I had room, I would have loved 3, but 2 Warp Energy at least, I thought was probably needed. Other than that, I think for the tournament and in hindsight, I would have switched the Strength Charm to a Crystal Shard, but I also think that a 3rd Buffer Piece would have been a good call for that as well. Strength Charm is just very useful in the mirror match, which I'll talk about later on here, and that did come up. Other than that, though, I think the list played really well. It played, I would say, pretty close to perfect. Lunatone, Solrock. The Lunatone did not overly impress me for the tournament, but ironically, the Solrock free retreat was more impressive to me than the Lunatone itself. I don't know if that's worth the 6 spots, but the deck played really well for the tournament. I guess I'll just leave it at that. To give a quick rundown of the tournament here, round 1 I played against Vileplume EX. Normally this should be an incredibly favorable and very easy matchup, but I opened with Holin's Magnemite and absolutely nothing, and I ended up dead drawing for the first 3 to 4 turns of the game. Thankfully, for me, The Holland's Magnemite was resistant to grass, which helped me out a lot. And the second thing was that my opponent also didn't have the best opening hand. He ended up whiffing the Vileplume for the first 4 or 5 turns of the game as well. Eventually, I hit a Holland's Mentor, and from there, I feel pretty confident being able to set up 2 Banette EX, and eventually, I just draw out of it. So I caught a really lucky break in that first round. Second round, I played against a Metacham EX deck. He played a 101 Scizor line. In general, Metacham is going to be highly favorable to me, or for me. The 101 Scizor line actually came in. I was not expecting it, but in the middle of the game, he was able to swoop Teleporter into a Scyther, evolve into a Scizor, and that one Scizor actually caused quite a bit of trouble, but thankfully I was far enough ahead in that game that I was able to trade Banettes with it. So he got, I think, 1 free Banette knockout, and then I was able to knock it out with the second Banette. Ended up winning that 2-0. Third round, I played against Chuck with Dragtrode EX. If you guys have not subscribed to his YouTube channel, make sure to do that. He is putting out some phenomenal content as well. So this, I didn't realize how bad of a matchup this was going in. I thought it was, probably wasn't great, but I thought it was pretty winnable. And essentially at the start of the game, I am looking at a turn 2 knockout with Lunatone on a Rocket Sneasel EX. And I set it up where I play my Crystal Beach, I do my Mentor, I have all my stuff. And essentially to get out of this, he needs our Energy, Mentor, Stadium. And he has a 4-card hand. I use Foresight on him to ensure that he won't draw one of the pieces. So I'm feeling pretty confident going into his turn. And out of those 4 cards, he has, well, Transceiver, Stadium, and then the R Energy. And it was just one of those things where I felt like I played to the odds pretty heavily. It just didn't pan out that game. From there, Chuck won pretty easily once he was able to set up. I was down an energy drop there as well, so he just went through the Banettes after that. Fourth round, I played against Nidoqueen. This is a pretty favorable matchup considering Banette EX is resistant to fighting, and then I have the Lunatone Solrock combo to shut off the Pidgeot. He got a pretty slow start on top of that, while I got a turn 1 Banette, and I was able just to go through multiple Nidoqueens while he never really got set up. Fifth round, I played against Jason Klaczynski in probably one of the best Pokemon games I've played in a long time. It was incredibly close. I knew heading in this was going to be a very close matchup, and that I was going to be relying on my Warp Points and my Warp Energy. My general strategy for the game was that I was going to try to go up 2 to 3 prizes very quickly, and then use my 3 Warp Points to take my remaining 3 prizes. I knew playing Rayquaza EX that Warp Point would allow Banette to knock out anything in his deck. If I played smart and I used good shady moves, I start out, I open with Lunatone, and I have Shuppet Energy on the bench, or I mentored for 2 Shuppets, and I put Shuppet Energy, and I have the chance to put a Banette up, but I realize it's not the best play, because I don't want to go all in on a turn 2 Banette and take a turn 2 knockout on him. So instead, I attach to 1 Shuppet, and then on the following turn, I attach to the other Shuppet. And this ends up being the right play. A lot of the times in this matchup, or in any POW matchup, you want to be able to set up 2 attackers and be able to set them up consistently. And that ended up playing really well for me. And then beyond that, I was able to get ahead on him. He does his POW stuff. I was lucky I had Warp Energies and Warp Points where I need him in the game. He made one mistake in the game where he accidentally POWs a Solrock, forgetting that the Lunatone gives it free retreat. And from there, I am just able to pull ahead and win that game. I feel like I didn't do that game justice. That was an incredibly, incredibly close game. Both of us played that matchup really well. Heading into top 4, I'm playing against James Arnold in essentially a mirror match. James's list and mine are very similar. I did feel heading into that matchup that I was going to be a slight favorite. I felt I had fewer dead cards, including the Holland's Magnemite as an extra energy drop and a searchable energy I felt made me slightly more consistent getting a turn 1 energy drop, and then the Jolteon Star should also make it easier for me to push over a buffer piece. So But when I say I felt slightly favored in that matchup, we're talking percentage points, not, large amounts. Maybe, I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 10%. And then heading into the game itself, I ended up winning the first game pretty easily, where I just got a good Banette going and then was able just to run through his stuff. In the second game, him and I both kind of came to the realization that the entire matchup revolved around the safeguard Banette and how exactly we utilize that. And it kind of created this really interesting dynamic where, what do you ascension to the first turn of the game? Do you ascension to the safeguard Banette, or do you ascension to the Banette EX and then they ascension to the safeguard Banette? And generally what we found is that you want to ascension to the safeguard Banette if you go first, and then you want to ascension to Banette EX if you go second. And that's just because you cannot let their Banette get the first hit in on your Banette. And if you go into Banette EX and they hit you for 30, you're automatically bouncing 10 of that damage back. And in the second game, kind of goes the opposite of the first. He draws really well in the second game, while I do really well in the first game, and he ends up pulling ahead and winning that. The third game was close. Essentially what it came down to is he had a hand of like 5 or 6 cards, and I had to essentially risk that he was not able to knock out my Banette EX. And he was going to be, with his shading move and all of his stuff, he was going to be 10 damage shy. So what he needed a Strength Charm or a way to get a supporter in the discard pile. And, I mean, I put it at probably 50-50. It was close. And his turn, he does not have the supporter, or he could have had a Strength Charm. But he doesn't have the supporter in his hand, he doesn't have the Strength Charm in his hand, or the discard supporter in his hand, so he rockets Adamants. At this point, I'm feeling pretty confident, because the only way that he knocks me out is if he draws the Strength Charm. And he had, I think, a 33, 34 card deck, and he's drawing, I believe, 5 cards, 1 Strength Charm in the deck. So essentially, it's like a sub 20% chance that he hits the Strength Charm, but he ends up hitting the Strength Charm off the 5-card admin, and from there, he's just able to pull ahead pretty massively and ends up winning that game as well. All in all, they were great games. I guess it was probably, at the time I was a little salty about it, but I do feel it was pretty fitting. He had put a lot more work into that deck than I did, and he played the matchup incredibly well. He's an outstanding player. Just obviously, anytime you're playing a really, really close game with a really good player and you come up just a little bit short, it's really, really frustrating. But like I said, he played absolutely fantastically. I felt I played really, really well also. I think the only mistake that I really caught of myself was I forgot to play Crystal Beach, and he ended up playing his on the second turn, so that left one more dead card in my deck. But all in all, it was a great game, great matchup, and a good tournament. James ended up losing the finals to Chuck with Dragtrode. It was just not a favorable matchup for us. I don't think I would have done any better against Chuck in the finals. Chuck is just a phenomenal player with a pretty favorable matchup. So I ended up top 4-2 record. The surprises from the tournament, the first was just the Surge Banette EX. There was so much of it there, and we went from barely seeing any of it in some of these tournaments to seeing a lot of it. And I would say out of the 20-some people we had in the tournament, I would say you probably had 6 or 7 Banette decks, so probably a little over a third of the tournament was Banette. The other thing that I found very surprising was Joseph Bolt, who has not played in a bunch of these Sunday tournaments, but was a very good player back in the day, played a Dark Steelix deck. And he played a very, very, probably the best Dark Steelix list I've ever seen. And he nearly beat Chuck. Chuck got really lucky against him to end up winning that game. And then he ended up, James Arnold ended up slightly edging him out in the last round of Swiss 2. And if Bolt would have won either one of those 2 games, he would have made top 4, and I think had at least a decent shot at winning that tournament too. Which I think that's going to add kind of another archetype to the field that we haven't really seen a whole lot of, and I think you'll see more Dark Steelix decks heading into some of these tournaments. I also think you'll probably see more Dark decks in some of these tournaments as well, just considering how popular Banette was in this event as well. And since they posted all the lists for the top 4, which I'll share right after this, and everyone has access to Chuck's list. I think you'll probably see more drag trode than you had in the past, too. But all in all, that is kind of my wrap-up of the tournament. And then, like I said, I'll just go ahead and jump into and show you the 4 different lists that did well here.